I'm trying to encourage my students that when they're confused about something in the book, to see that as something that's actually where you can produce the most interesting interpretation, because when there's something ambiguous or confusing, that's where the rewards are greater. Rather than the things that, if they say, oh, I understood this part, but they steer clear of some of the confusion, I feel like, well, that's where you should go. That's where you should gravitate, right? And the names themselves, some of my students were saying, oh, that's already confusing. I don't know if it's Crispina or Crispiniana. And I was like, well, I mean, you would, it's sort of interesting enough already that those names are so similar. I think this is clearly where the confusion, Bibiana, Belonesia, especially for an American reader, those names, they get all tangled. And I think, like, if that's true, that's already a kind of interesting interpretation of the book. Could the names of these two women be confused as a way of talking about the ways their identities are confused? Then already we're having some kind of interpretive engagement with the book. So I don't know if I'm really answering, Marilia, your question, but that was, one of the things I was thinking about with the names. I will say that some of the names, I have this idea that not everyone shares, but sometimes I like to try to keep some of the original language when I can in the English, because I think it's good for people to struggle with another language and to mispronounce things. I think that's like a beautiful effort, even if it's a failure, If I try to say something in French, I'll totally butcher it, but it's the attempt to say someone's name in the original language that I think is very good. This might not be true where you are, if whoever's listening to me now, but in the United States, Americans are very uncomfortable sounding stupid when they're trying to say something in another language, or if they feel like they're mispronouncing something. But I feel against that current. I feel that there's something really fun in saying Zeca Chapéu Grande, and I didn't want to say right off the bat, Big Hat Zeca. I wanted to keep Zeca Chapéu Grande, and I wanted to keep Salu and Belo as well as Belonesia. And it doesn't matter too much if some of the saints I translated and some of them I left in Portuguese, because we sometimes we don't really, in English, especially the Catholicism that we have here, some of the saints are easily translatable, but Itamar won't be surprised to learn that some of the saints in Portuguese are not easily translatable into English, or just the ways, there's certain kinds of expressions, or certainly the orixás and the encantados. So it's fun to bring in some of that music. Sorry, I'm back to the music theme, but I love hearing the names of some of these birds, Tapuculo and which actually sounds a little bit like vulgar, so I probably shouldn't even Tapu. There's a bird, right? Itamar, Tapuculo, which shows up in
Sim, sim. É
Portugal.
pássaro típico.
Yes, it's a bird, typical from Chapada Diamantina.
Comes from Spanish, I believe. So it's a bird with a feather that covers its bunda. There's all this poetry. There's all this
Sim,
poetry,
sim.
and the Olho de Fogo is a bird that appears in his next novel. There's a poetry to some of these words and some of these names, and sometimes you want to translate them, but sometimes you feel like there's something lost if you change the music of them. So I don't know. So like, I'll give you an example. I'm being very abstract, but Nossa Senhora Aparecida, I kind of feel like that needs to stay in Portuguese, right? Because even if I translate it, it's not like Americans go, oh yeah, that iteration of the Virgin Mary. It's very unique to the Portuguese language. It's a way of referring to the Virgin Mary, but she has like 10 different epithets. So does Jesus, so does the Father. and some of them translate very nicely and some of them don't. Same thing with the orixás, you know, so you gotta, sometimes you gotta keep the original Portuguese. And these days readers have their phones next to them. They, you know, I don't mean to cheat, but people can Google these things these days. So it's not like a huge risk. And Itamar, I have to say, like, one person I was talking to was like a bird watcher. And there's one page in the first section of Torturado. It's just like encyclopedia of local birds. And I didn't want, you know, some of them I didn't even want to try to translate them because the poetry of it, you want to say the birds' names out loud, or the fruit, you know. Pitanga, Buriti, and all these things, you kind of want to hear the music.
Yeah, I mean, it's really musical. And I think the Brazilian Portuguese has a very special music and rhythm that the European Portuguese lacks, you know. And I totally agree. I mean, I think these words, Zeca Chapéu Grande, even the names, they have this musical tune about them. Yes, it's very wise to keep them in the original, I think. Yeah.